Welcome back. A month after Cyclone Idai tore through Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe, UNICEF says 1.6 million children are still very vulnerable to disease and a lack of food. In Mozambique alone, 1 million children need help. Nearly 500,000 more in Malawi also need food and medicines. Cholera and malaria cases are now being diagnosed in Mozambique after that cyclone hit. James Elders, the Regional Chief of Communications for Eastern and Southern Africa for UNICEF, he joins us now by Skype from Nairobi. James, good evening to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. You're obviously particularly worried about children in Mozambique. What are you worried about?
Yeah, I think we're worried that the sheer number, like you say, 1 million. And when I was recently in Mozambique, you're reminded time and again that each one of those is a real number. Each one of those is a child who just a month ago was, living a difficult life in some parts of Mozambique, but getting by, going to school, parents had a livelihood, and then that all got washed away in a really devastating, distressing manner. And 4 weeks later, those who have survived that, those who are trying to get back on their feet, are now sort of stalked by waterborne diseases. The great dark irony of this, that, you lose so much and you lose access to safe water, and yet you're surrounded by water. So waterborne diseases are a huge concern for kids right now.
There's also a large number of children who are actually in transit camps. They don't know where their families are. They don't even know if their parents are alive. You must be particularly worried for them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very distressing when you see just the stress that children have endured. There's an amazing community network, I think, in Mozambique and what I've seen in Zimbabwe as well. And communities are looking after those kids as best they can. But you're right, when a child doesn't know where their mother or father is, or any caregiver, there's not really a worse scenario for that child. UNICEF is very big on making sure there's psychosocial support for them. Education is a key part. Kids need to be back in school. They need to be away from the stress that their families are enduring, or that wider community. But right now, yeah, they're the big things. It's about getting those kids back to families, getting families back to their communities they want to rebuild, but also making sure that then people who have endured so much after this horrible hurricane, cyclone and flooding don't now suffer a second punch with waterborne diseases.
You're talking about waterborne diseases. Cholera, of course, you had to ship 1 million doses of the vaccine, the cholera vaccine, out to Mozambique. Has that stopped a big outbreak? How many cases are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, we're now seeing, we've got around 4,000 or 5,000 cases. 900,000 vaccines was an enormous effort by, yes, UNICEF, by other UN agencies, by the government, and of course by everyday Mozambicans, because to mobilise that many people, the logistics was a huge ask at a time where telecommunications were down, road networks were down, and so on and so on. So 4,000 to 5,000 cases is obviously too many when you see a mother trying to care for a child who has cholera. And again, the stress that they are enduring, that one is too many. But yes, the numbers, given what had happened in Mozambique, health workers would be comfortable with those, and we may have to do another cholera vaccination, because this is the last. We can't be complacent at this time. People need a break from this. They need a chance to get back on their feet.
What kind of help do people there actually need at the moment? What kind of help are you trying to ship in to them at this stage?
I think the big things are, as we say, that getting kids back to families, so psychological support, education is always key. It is, to us, a life-saving element. You get kids back a sense of normality. Again, the water systems, you can't overstate the importance of safe water. So rebuilding water systems, cholera vaccination, malaria now, of course, becomes a huge problem. So UNICEF's distributing 500,000 malaria nets, getting health centres rebuilt. So it's a huge ask, and unfortunately none of this is free. There is a big financial drain on this, but these people in these communities have suffered so much and have done as much as they possibly can to cope with the first crisis of a cyclone, the second crisis of flooding, and now it seems right that there is that additional international support to get them back on their feet.
What kind of international support are you getting? Are you finding that various countries, various governments, various NGOs are getting involved and getting behind you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in the early stages, when there was a lot of media attention, and obviously you get those really terrible graphic images, then we saw a lot of solidarity and support, particularly, I think, from the UK's government, the people of Germany. We've seen that from the South African government to a degree. But of course, as the floodwaters recede, media interest also does. So I think UNICEF's funding is probably around 15% funded, so 85% not funded. UNICEF, like other organisations, is 100% donor funded. So that's a big drain. We're seeing this increasingly. We are seeing more natural disasters. We are seeing a changing climate. The UN Secretary General mentioned this as another alarm bell. Mozambique and Malawi and Zimbabwe should warn everyone. So I think we're going to see more of these before we see less. So there is going to be a continual drain on resources until, I guess, those big decisions and big changes are made when it comes to use of resources and the impact on the climate.
You need a lot more help then, clearly. I mean, you'll be making appeal after appeal. You've been through this before. It's not your first rodeo. Trying to keep this kind of story in the public domain is a very important thing to do. And yet, you've got to try and make sure that, in the end, people get what they need, which is going to cost you money.
No, exactly. And I think also it's got to be said, we're very grateful for outlets like SABC that do keep this story alive, because they see that it's right in practice and right in principle. There's a great story to be told about the people of Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Malawi and how they are fighting back and trying to rebuild when so much was literally washed away in front of their eyes. But we've also learned, as you say, not the first rodeo, I've also learned around the world that it's not just right in principle to support those who need that leg up. It's right in practice. We know that it's cheaper to support people in the early onsets of a crisis rather than wait. It does become more expensive the longer we leave it. So, Mozambicans, Zimbabweans, Malawians, these are all of our neighbours. So supporting them now in whatever capacity people can will save them down the road, but will also save money down the road.
And the governments of Zimbabwe, Malawi and Mozambique, presumably they're doing everything they can to help you. They've made sure that you've had easy access to the areas you need access to?
Yeah, it's very important. Absolutely, yes. Across the board, they've done exactly that. They've made sure it's open. They've tried to rebuild roads where they can, rebuild bridges where they can, and just make sure that access is there. They need to be frontline players, of course. The UN has experience in emergencies around the world, but this is, first role of governments, and I think they recognise that and are stepping up to the plate.
James Elder, thank you very much indeed in Nairobi for you tonight. He is a spokesperson there for UNICEF, the latest, of course, on the situation in Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe.